The doctor looked at my son before he looked at me. "Mr. Daniel Carter," he said quietly, "can you please step outside for just a moment? I need to ask your father something privately." My son smiled with practiced confidence. "There's really no need," he replied. "Dad gets confused with financial decisions now. I handle everything." I sat there without moving. The doctor didn't argue, he simply turned toward me again. "Mr. Carter, would you like your son to stay?" I answered before Daniel had the chance. "No." The room became silent. Daniel stared at me as though I had spoken in another language. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I looked directly into his eyes. "Please wait outside." For the first time in nearly 11 months, my own son hesitated before obeying me. He walked out with a forced smile, convinced this tiny disagreement meant nothing. He had absolutely no idea that the biggest mistake he had ever made wasn't taking control of my life. It was believing I had stopped paying attention. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go any further, drop your first name and your city in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where everyone is listening from. And if stories about quiet justice, family betrayal, and hardened respect mean something to you, subscribe so you won't miss the next one. My name is Harold Carter. I'm 72 years old. For 43 years I owned Carter Industrial Supply, a regional manufacturing distributor that started inside a rented warehouse, measuring just 1,800 square feet. When I opened that warehouse in 1981, I had exactly $12,400 in savings, one used delivery truck with over 180,000 miles on the engine, and a folding desk bought at a government surplus auction for $18. No investors. No wealthy relatives. No shortcuts. During the first 3 years, I worked an average of 91 hours every week. I loaded trucks before sunrise. Delivered orders myself. Balanced invoices after midnight. I still remember falling asleep over inventory sheets with a calculator in my hand. People like to remember success. Very few remember exhaustion. By my 50th birthday, the company employed 68 people. By 60, we had 193 employees across 3 locations. By the time I officially retired as president at 68, annual revenue had crossed $38 million. Business magazines called me disciplined. Employees called me fair. Banks called me reliable. But inside my own family, I slowly became invisible. It didn't happen all at once. That is rarely how families change. Respect doesn't usually disappear in one argument. It erodes one small decision at a time. The first sign came years before I noticed it. Daniel was 12. His younger sister Emily was 9. One Saturday morning, I spent almost 4 hours building a treehouse behind our home. Nothing fancy. Just pressure-treated lumber, sturdy bolts, and enough patience to make sure it wouldn't wobble. When I finished, Daniel climbed halfway up the ladder. Then he frowned. "Mom," he called, "Dad built it wrong." I asked what was wrong. He pointed toward a branch. "It would look cooler over there." His mother laughed. "Well, maybe your father should have asked you first." Everyone laughed, including me. At the time it sounded harmless. Kids say things. Parents smile. Life moves on. Looking back now, that tiny moment contained something much larger. Daniel wasn't criticizing the treehouse. He was testing whether my judgment could be questioned without consequence. Over the years, that habit quietly grew. Whenever I chose a vacation destination, Daniel suggested somewhere better. Whenever I bought a car, he explained why another model was smarter. Whenever I repaired something myself, he asked why I hadn't hired professionals. None of those conversations were cruel. They were subtle, constant, like water wearing down stone. Daniel was intelligent. Very intelligent. He graduated near the top of his engineering class. Earned an MBA before turning 30. Built an impressive consulting career. He solved problems for large corporations. Eventually, he began treating people the same way, including me. In Daniel's mind, every situation had an optimal solution. Every decision could be improved. Every emotion slowed efficiency. He wasn't trying to hurt people. He genuinely believed competence gave him responsibility. The more capable he became, the harder it was for him to imagine that someone else, especially someone older, might still know something he didn't. Emily was different. She became a high school art teacher. She measured success in conversations instead of contracts. She called every Sunday. Never because she needed money. Never because she wanted advice. She simply wanted to hear my voice. Daniel called mostly when there was something to organize. Dad, have you renewed the insurance? Dad, let me compare your investments. Dad, your accountant charges too much. Everything became a project. Everything became a correction. After my wife Margaret passed away from pancreatic cancer at 69, the balance inside our family disappeared. Margaret had always translated us to each other. She softened my stubbornness. She slowed Daniel's certainty. Without her, there was no interpreter. Only assumptions. The first 6 months after her funeral were lonely. I won't pretend otherwise. A house built for 4 people suddenly echoed. You notice strange things when you're alone. Which staircase creaks? Which cabinet door never fully closes? Which side of the bed stays perfectly made because nobody sleeps there anymore? People think grief is loud. It isn't. Most days. It's painfully quiet. Daniel started visiting more often. At first I appreciated it. He brought groceries, scheduled maintenance appointments, installed security cameras, changed passwords, organized medical records. Everything looked helpful. Everyone praised him. You're lucky, neighbors would say. Your son takes wonderful care of you. They weren't wrong. Not yet. The change happened after I fell on an icy driveway one January morning. Nothing serious. A fractured wrist. 3 stitches above my eyebrow. The emergency room discharged me the same evening. But Daniel reacted as though I had survived a catastrophe. Dad, he said while driving me home, this proves you can't keep managing everything yourself. I slipped on ice. Exactly. People slip. Older people don't recover the same. It wasn't the words. It was the certainty. No discussion. No questions. Only conclusions. Within 2 weeks he had arranged duplicate house keys. Then he suggested online banking. Then joint account access for emergencies. Then automatic bill payments. Each step sounded reasonable by itself. Reasonable decisions often hide unreasonable destinations. And I kept saying yes. Not because I agreed. Because I was tired. Grief drains more than emotion. It drains resistance. Every signature felt easier than another debate. Every conversation ended with the same sentence. Trust me, Dad, I'm doing this for your own good. I wanted to believe him. After all, he was my son. What father wants to imagine that love and control can slowly become indistinguishable? So I convinced myself everything would be fine. I had spent decades building businesses. Surely I could recognize if something truly dangerous was happening. I was wrong. Because the most expensive mistake Daniel ever made was assuming age had made me forget how to notice patterns. I wish I could tell you there was one dramatic afternoon when everything changed. There wasn't. Control arrived the same way rust appears on steel. Quietly, almost politely. One afternoon Daniel stopped by carrying a leather portfolio, instead of his usual laptop bag. "I've been reviewing your monthly expenses," he said while laying papers across my dining room table. I smiled. "You've been reviewing them?" He nodded without noticing my expression. "You're paying for 3 magazine subscriptions you don't read anymore, 2 different roadside assistance plans, an investment advisory fee that's nearly 1%, that's inefficient." He circled numbers with a blue pen, as though he were presenting quarterly results to a board of directors. "You can save almost $11,000 a year." $11,000. To Daniel, it was proof he was protecting me. To me, it was proof he had started looking at my life as a spreadsheet instead of a home. I signed nothing that afternoon. But I noticed something. He no longer asked permission before opening my mail. He simply opened it. When a package arrived, he checked the receipt before handing it to me. When I answered my own phone, he wanted to know who had called. None of those things sounded alarming by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. Emily noticed it before I admitted it. She came over one Sunday carrying homemade chicken soup and fresh bread. Daniel had left only 20 minutes earlier. She looked around the kitchen. "Dad, what? Why are all your file cabinets locked?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "Daniel bought new locks, said it would help organize important documents." She slowly put the soup on the counter. "And where are your keys?" I reached into my pocket. "Only house keys. Car keys. Nothing else." I frowned. "I honestly don't know." Emily didn't say another word for nearly a minute. Then she quietly asked, "Does Daniel have them?" I didn't answer. Because I already knew. He did. Not because he stole them. Because somewhere over the previous months, I had handed them over one responsibility at a time. The realization sat in my stomach like cold iron. That evening I walked through my own house differently. Every room felt familiar. Yet somehow less mine. The filing cabinet. The office desk. The safe in the closet. Daniel knew combinations. Passwords. Account numbers. Insurance contacts. Attorney information. He had become the gatekeeper of a life I had spent 72 years building. And somehow, everyone called that responsibility. I called my attorney the following Tuesday. Not because I wanted to accuse my son of anything. Because I wanted to understand exactly what authority he actually possessed. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She had represented my company during its final 12 years before retirement. Rebecca had a habit of listening twice as long as most lawyers. She never interrupted. She simply took notes. When I finished explaining everything, she leaned back. "Harold," she said carefully, "what you're describing isn't unusual." "It isn't." "No, that doesn't make me feel better." "It shouldn't." She folded her hands. Many adult children gradually assume more responsibility for agging parents. Sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes responsibility quietly becomes ownership. The room became very still. She slid copies of several documents across the table. Power of attorney. Financial authorization. Healthcare directives. Every signature was mine. Every page legally valid. Nothing had been forged. Nothing had been stolen. I remembered signing each document. Usually after Daniel said the same sentence. "This just makes things easier." Rebecca looked directly at me. "Did you understand every document before signing?" "I trusted my son." She nodded slowly. "I didn't ask whether you trusted him." I looked away. No, for the first time since Margaret died. I felt embarrassed. Not because Daniel had gained control. Because I had helped him do it. Rebecca surprised me. She didn't criticize Daniel. She didn't tell me to revoke everything immediately. Instead, she asked one question. Harold, has your son ever underestimated you? I almost laughed. Constantly. She smiled for the first time. Good. Good. People who underestimate someone stop watching carefully. I frowned. What are you thinking? She closed the folder. I'm thinking that if Daniel believes he already controls everything. She let the sentence hang. He may stop looking for what he doesn't know exists. Those words stayed with me all the way home. What doesn't he know exists? I spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about that question. On the 4th night, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in almost 16 years. A small acquisition. Back when Carter Industrial Supply had purchased a struggling machine parts distributor in Ohio. Most people remembered the warehouses, the delivery trucks, the customer contracts. Almost nobody remembered one unusual piece of the deal. Neither did Daniel, because he had never attended those negotiations. He had been living in Chicago, building his own career. He knew the headlines, not the paperwork. Inside that acquisition had been one forgotten commercial property. An agging brick building near a freight terminal. At the time, it wasn't worth much. Most people considered it an inconvenience. So I kept it under a completely separate holding company. A company with no connection to Carter Industrial Supply's operating accounts. No connection to my retirement portfolio. No connection to the estate documents Daniel obsessed over. Its annual taxes were paid automatically. Its paperwork stayed with Rebecca. Not inside my house. Not inside my safe. Not inside any cabinet Daniel had organized. Over 16 years. The city transformed. A logistics expansion. New rail access. Distribution centers. Land values climbed. Then doubled. Then doubled again. Last year, Rebecca had quietly mentioned its updated appraisal. I had almost forgotten the number. Just under $28 million. I stared at the ceiling that night. Daniel believed he controlled everything I owned. Everything, except the single asset that had become more valuable than nearly everything else combined. He had searched every drawer, every account, every investment report. But he never searched history. Because history bored him. He only cared about what was already organized. And that would become the most expensive assumption of his entire life. I didn't celebrate that discovery. People often imagine revenge begins with excitement. It doesn't. Not the kind that lasts. Real justice usually begins with disappointment. I sat in Margaret's old reading chair until almost midnight, staring at a photograph taken 27 years earlier. Daniel was standing beside me at the grand opening of our second warehouse. He was 28 then, smiling proudly, his arm around my shoulder. Back then, he didn't see me as someone who needed to be managed. He saw me as someone he wanted to become. Somewhere along the way, success changed him. Or perhaps success simply revealed a part of him that had always been there. The next morning, Daniel arrived exactly at 8:15. He never knocked anymore. He used his key. Morning, Dad. Morning. I scheduled a meeting with your financial advisor this Friday. I didn't ask for one. I know. He said it so casually that he didn't even notice what he'd admitted. I've already cancelled your old advisor. His fees don't make sense. I folded my newspaper. You cancelled him. You don't need to worry about those details. Those words landed harder than he realized. You don't need to worry. Not because I couldn't. Because he had decided I shouldn't. He walked through the kitchen opening cabinets. You've got too much sodium in here. A can of soup went into one box. Crackers into another. Frozen dinners disappeared into a trash bag. I bought healthier groceries. I watched quietly. He wasn't trying to punish me. In his mind, he was improving my life. That was what made everything so complicated. Cruel people are easy to recognize. People convinced they're helping can be much harder to stop. As he finished reorganizing the pantry, he turned toward me. "Oh, one more thing." "What?" "I think it's time you stop driving." I looked at him. "I've never had a serious accident. It's about reducing risk." My doctor disagrees. He doesn't know your daily habits like I do. There it was again. Not a conversation. A decision. Already made. "I've listed your SUV online." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "You what?" "I haven't sold it yet." "You listed my vehicle. It'll make life easier." I stood up slowly. The room felt unusually quiet. "My name is on that title." "I know. And you listed it anyway. You'll thank me later." I stared at my own son. Then something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I suddenly understood something important. Daniel had stopped asking permission because nobody had challenged him in months. Every successful takeover teaches the person doing it that resistance no longer exists. That afternoon, after he left, I called Rebecca. "I think we're getting close." "What happened?" I told her about the SUV. She remained silent for a moment. "Harold." "Yes." "Has Daniel ever asked you one question about your old acquisition files?" "No." "Any holding companies?" "No." "Commercial properties?" "Never." She sighed softly. "Then he still believes he's seen the entire picture." "And he hasn't." "Not even close." For the first time since Margaret died, I felt calm. Not because I wanted to defeat my son. Because I finally understood I didn't have to argue with him. People reveal far more when they think they've already won. So I stopped correcting him. When he said, "I've simplified your finances," I nodded. When he announced, "Everything important is under control," I thanked him. When relatives complimented him for taking such wonderful care of me, I smiled politely. Inside I watched. I listened. I waited. Waiting had been one of the most valuable business skills I'd ever learned. The best negotiations were never won by the loudest person. They were won by the person willing to let the other side become overconfident. A month later, our entire family gathered for my granddaughter Lily's 16th birthday. Nearly 30 people filled Daniel's backyard. Children ran through sprinklers. Music played softly. Neighbors wandered in carrying desserts. Everything looked perfect. Until I overheard a conversation on the patio. Daniel was speaking with his brother-in-law, Mark. "I've basically taken over Dad's affairs." Mark laughed. "That must be exhausting." "It is sometimes, but honestly." Daniel shrugged. "Someone has to make the adult decisions." Adult decisions. I stood only 15 feet away. Neither of them noticed. Mark asked, "Does your dad mind?" Daniel smiled. "He did at first. And now, he knows it's for the best." I quietly turned away before either man saw me. Those words hurt more than I expected. Not because Daniel believed them. Because he genuinely did. In his mind, he hadn't taken anything. He had simply promoted himself into the role he believed I could no longer perform. That night, after everyone left, Emily stayed behind to help clean. She placed paper plates into a trash bag and finally asked the question she'd been holding back for weeks. "Dad, are you really okay?" I looked toward the empty backyard. The light still hung across the fence. The balloons had started to lose air. "No," she nodded. "I didn't think so. I miss being treated like your father." Emily walked over and hugged me. Not tightly. Just enough. You still are. I closed my eyes. I hope your brother remembers that before it's too late. Emily didn't answer. Because deep down, she was beginning to wonder the same thing. The following Monday, Daniel called before 8 in the morning. Dad, don't forget, I'm picking you up at 10. For what? The meeting with the wealth management team. I thought I already had one. You did. So why another? Because I found a better firm. I almost smiled. Found. As if 43 years of building a business could be replaced by a weekend of online research. All right, I said. I've already emailed them your financial summary. Financial summary. That phrase stayed with me long after we ended the call. When I built Carter Industrial Supply, I had learned something about summaries. Every summary leaves something out. Sometimes intentionally. Sometimes because the person writing it doesn't know what they're missing. At exactly 10 o'clock, Daniel pulled into my driveway. He opened the passenger door before I even reached the car. Careful. I can still get into a vehicle. I know, Dad. But his tone suggested otherwise. The firm's office occupied the top floor of a modern glass building downtown. Everything inside looked expensive. Marble floors. Minimalist furniture. Coffee machines that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. A young advisor greeted us with a practiced smile. Mr. Carter, Mr. Carter. He shook Daniel's hand first. Then mine. A tiny detail. Most people wouldn't notice. I did. We sat around a polished conference table. The advisor opened a presentation. So based on the information Daniel provided. Not Harold. Daniel. We've developed a simplified strategy for preserving your remaining assets. Remaining assets. I let him continue. Charts appeared on a large screen. Retirement income. Tax planning. Estate efficiency. Everything looked professionally prepared. Everything also relied on one assumption. That Daniel's list of assets was complete. It wasn't even close. The advisor clicked to the final slide. Our recommendation is to consolidate everything into one structure. Everything. Interesting word. He looked at me. What do you think, Mr. Carter? Before I answered, Daniel spoke. He trusts my judgment. The advisor nodded. Excellent. I leaned forward. I believe you forgot something. Both men looked at me. I'm sorry, the advisor asked. You said everything. Yes, but you only analyzed what you were shown. The room became unusually quiet. Daniel frowned. Dad. I smiled politely. No, it's all right. I turned back toward the advisor. You've done quality work. Thank you. But you've evaluated approximately 40% of my actual holdings. His eyebrows lifted. Daniel laughed awkwardly. Dad likes exaggerating. I looked at my son. No. Silence. The advisor slowly closed his laptop. I wasn't aware there were additional assets. Of course you weren't. Daniel crossed his arms. What assets? I answered calmly. The ones you never asked about. His confidence slipped for the first time in months. What are you talking about? History. He stared. I've reviewed every account. I know. I've reviewed every investment. I know. I've organized every property. I nodded. You organized every property you knew existed. The drive home was the quietest we'd shared in years. Daniel kept glancing toward me. Finally he asked, What didn't you tell me? I looked out the window. The better question, I said softly, is why you assumed you'd been told everything. He didn't answer. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, My son had encountered a problem he couldn't immediately solve. That evening my phone rang. "Rebecca, it's begun," she said. "What has?" Daniel called. I couldn't help smiling. "What did he want?" "He asked whether you owned any companies that weren't listed in his records." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth." "What truth?" "That I'm your attorney." She laughed quietly. "And that my responsibility is to answer your questions, not his." I imagined Daniel ending that phone call. Not angry. Confused. Confusion is uncomfortable for people accustomed to certainty. The next several days were fascinating. Daniel visited 3 times. Each conversation sounded almost identical. "Dad, is there something I should know?" "About what?" "Our finances." "Our?" He hesitated. "I mean yours." I let the silence do the work. Then changed the subject. He wasn't used to unanswered questions. By Friday afternoon, he had stopped pretending curiosity. Now he looked worried. "Dad, if there's paperwork somewhere, I need it." "No, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. If something happens to you, I've already planned for that." "When?" "Years ago." His shoulders slowly dropped. "Years ago. Before he ever believed he controlled my future. Before he had passwords. Before he had keys. Before he started making decisions for me." That night I opened the old cedar chest Margaret had loved. Inside were photo albums, handwritten letters, and a faded envelope in her handwriting. Across the front she had written only 6 words. "For Harold, when you doubt yourself." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She had written it during her chemotherapy. The first sentence made me stop breathing for a moment. "If you're reading this, someone has probably convinced you that you're becoming smaller. Please don't believe them." I sat there for nearly an hour. Reading. Remembering. Crying quietly. The final line stayed with me long after I folded the letter. "Growing older doesn't reduce your worth, it simply reveals who still knows how to see it." I realized then. This story had never been about money. Not really. The $28 million property mattered. But it wasn't the heart of the problem. The real loss wasn't financial control. It was dignity. And I had finally decided. I was going to take that back. The following week, I invited Daniel to lunch. Not because I wanted another argument. Because I wanted one honest conversation before events moved beyond either of our control. We met at the same family restaurant, where Margaret and I had celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary. The waitress recognized me immediately. "Mr. Carter," she said with a smile, "it's good to see you again." She looked at Daniel. "Your father still orders the same thing every visit." Daniel laughed. "He doesn't change much." I smiled politely. "No, some things are worth keeping." For the first 15 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, Emily's school, Lily's upcoming driving test. Then Daniel placed his fork on the table. "Dad." "Yes. I've been thinking." "I imagine you have. If there are assets I don't know about, we need to update the estate plan." "We?" He hesitated. "You know what I mean." "I do." And what?" "Are you going to tell me?" I took a sip of coffee before answering. "Daniel, when you were 10 years old, do you remember helping me organize nails in the garage?" He looked confused. "Barely. You asked why I kept 3 different sizes." "I don't remember." "I told you something." He waited. A person who labels every box before opening it usually misses what's still in the truck. He frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything." He leaned back in frustration. Dad, why can't you just answer a simple question? I met his eyes. Because you stopped asking simple questions a long time ago. Silence. You started making assumptions instead. He looked away. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Not confidence. Not irritation. Uncertainty. I was trying to help. I know. I wasn't trying to take your life away. I know. I just... His voice faded. I didn't want something to happen to you. There it was. The truth. Not greed. Fear. Fear disguised as control. I understood it. That didn't make it harmless. You know what hurt the most? I asked quietly. He shook his head. It wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't the bank accounts. It wasn't even the power of attorney. He looked back at me. It was the day you stopped asking what I wanted. His shoulders dropped. I thought I already knew. I know you did. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Sometimes silence accomplishes what speeches never can. As we stood to leave, Daniel reached for the check. I've got it. I gently placed my hand over the folder. No, Dad. I've been paying for lunches longer than you've been alive. For the first time in months. He smiled. A real smile. Not the confident one he wore in meetings. The one he had as a boy. But the difficult part was still ahead. 3 days later, Rebecca called. The appraisal committee finalized everything. And the commercial property has officially received its updated valuation. I already knew it had increased. I didn't expect how much. $34,800,000. I closed my eyes. 6 years earlier. It had been worth less than half that. Rebecca continued. The redevelopment agreement is complete. When do they want possession? 90 days. I nodded slowly. So it's time. Yes. Have you prepared the documents? They're ready whenever you are. That evening, I sat alone in Margaret's garden. The roses she planted 15 years earlier were still blooming. She always said flowers rewarded patience. Business had taught me the same lesson. Nothing valuable grows overnight. Not companies. Not families. Not wisdom. The next morning, I asked Rebecca to schedule a family meeting. Not at my house. Not at Daniel's. At her office. Neutral ground. She invited everyone. Daniel, Emily, Mark, Lily, even my younger brother Thomas. Nobody knew why. Daniel assumed it was another estate planning session. Emily suspected something larger. Rebecca told them only one sentence. Mr. Carter would like everyone present. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived 20 minutes early. Rebecca placed a thick folder in front of me. Are you certain? I looked out her office window. I've never been more certain. She nodded. Then today isn't about proving anyone wrong. No, what is it about? I smiled softly, reminding my family who I still am. Outside, I watched Daniel's car pull into the parking lot. He walked toward the building carrying his leather portfolio. Just as confident as the first day he had started organizing my life. He still believed this meeting was about paperwork. He still believed he understood the entire story. He still had no idea that one forgotten decision I had made 16 years earlier was about to change every assumption he had built over the past 11 months. And for the first time, I wasn't nervous. I was simply ready. Daniel was the first to enter the conference room. He looked around, saw the long table and smiled politely. Morning, everyone. Emily arrived a few minutes later, carrying a notebook she probably wouldn't use. My brother Thomas walked in behind her, adjusting his glasses. Within 10 minutes, every chair was occupied. Rebecca closed the door. The room became quiet. Daniel glanced at the folders in front of each seat. So, he smiled. I assume we're finally updating Dad's estate plan. Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me. Mr. Carter, whenever you're ready. I stood slowly. Not because I needed help. Because I wanted everyone to understand that I was choosing my own pace. I appreciate all of you coming. Everyone nodded. Daniel folded his hands. Dad, you don't have to stand. I know. I prefer to. He leaned back. I looked around the room. I've spent the last 11 months watching something happen. Nobody spoke. I watched people begin asking my son questions about my life instead of asking me. Daniel lowered his eyes. I watched appointments get scheduled without my approval. I watched my mail opened before I read it. I watched decisions become announcements. Still, no one interrupted. I also watched myself allow it. That surprised everyone. Especially Daniel. I signed papers without reading them carefully. I avoided difficult conversations. I confused peace with surrender. Rebecca remained completely silent. She wanted every word to come from me. I looked at Daniel. I know you believed you were protecting me. I was. I know. I don't question your intentions. I question your assumptions. Daniel swallowed. I assumed you couldn't manage everything anymore. Exactly. You never asked whether I still could. His face tightened. I was scared after your fall. I know. I was scared after losing your mother too. Those words hit him hard. His shoulders sagged. For a few seconds, he looked like a little boy again. Then Rebecca opened the first folder. There is one matter Mr. Carter wanted everyone to understand. She placed a property map on the table. Daniel looked confused. I've never seen this. I know. Rebecca slid another document forward. This property has been owned through Carter Holdings East for more than 16 years. Daniel frowned. Carter Holdings East. I've never seen that company. No, I said calmly. You haven't. He picked up the appraisal. At first his expression didn't change. Then he reached the valuation page. His eyes stopped moving. He read the number again. Then a third time. 34. He looked at Rebecca. Is this? She nodded. The current certified valuation. Silence. Complete silence. Thomas slowly removed his glasses. Emily covered her mouth. Daniel looked at me. When? You bought this? 2010. You never told me. No. Why? Because at the time there was no reason. He stared at the redevelopment agreement. This is worthy. He couldn't finish the sentence. More than everything I reviewed, I answered quietly. He looked almost dizzy. I don't understand. I know. I reviewed every account. No. I reviewed every company. No. I checked every tax return. No. Rebecca finally spoke. You reviewed every document your father gave you access to. Daniel slowly sat back down. The confidence that had surrounded him for nearly a year quietly disappeared. Not dramatically. Just gone. I thought. He whispered. I thought I knew everything. I nodded. That was your mistake. Nobody celebrated. Nobody smiled. There was no applause. Only understanding. I walked to the window. When I built my company, I learned something. Everyone listened. The person who believes they've found every answer usually stops asking questions. I turned toward Daniel. You stopped asking. You started deciding. And once someone believes they already know everything, They stop seeing what is directly in front of them. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Dad. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. Just honest. I know. I never wanted to make you feel useless. I know. I only wanted to make sure nothing went wrong. I smiled sadly. And in trying to protect my future, you accidentally took away my present. Daniel lowered his head. No one in the room spoke for almost a full minute. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the greatest weight. Then Rebecca handed me one final envelope. I believe this belongs to you. I opened it. Inside were the revised estate documents. I looked around the room. I've made one final decision. Daniel looked up slowly. I am appointing Emily and Daniel as co-executors. Daniel blinked. What? Neither of you will make decisions alone. Emily looked equally surprised. And every major decision will require independent legal review. Rebecca nodded. The documents also restore full personal authority to Mr. Carter, while he remains mentally competent. Daniel looked at me. You still trust me? I smiled. I trust that you've learned something. He couldn't hold back his tears anymore. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning that trust back. I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. You don't earn trust with promises. He nodded. I know. You earn it one respectful decision at a time. For the first time in almost a year, my son asked me a question he should have asked from the beginning. What would you like to do now, Dad? I smiled. I'd like to go home. He nodded immediately. No meetings. No. No paperwork. No. Just a home. He stood and opened the conference room door. After a brief pause, he stepped aside. You first. It was such a small gesture. Most people would never notice it. I did. Because respect rarely returns through grand speeches. It comes back one quiet moment at a time. And as I walked past my son that afternoon, I realized the most expensive mistake he had ever made had never been overlooking a $34 million property. It was believing that growing older meant I had stopped being the man who built everything he was trying so hard to control. The weeks that followed didn't transform our family overnight. Life almost never works that way. There wasn't a dramatic apology dinner. There wasn't a heartfelt speech that erased 11 months of quiet hurt. There was something much smaller and much more difficult. Change. The first sign came the following Monday. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Daniel. Morning, Dad. Morning. I was wondering. He paused. Would you like me to come by this afternoon? I smiled to myself. Not because he offered. Because of the way he asked. I'd enjoy that. What time works for you? For you. 2 words. Simple. Almost invisible. Yet they meant more than any apology. When he arrived that afternoon, he stood on my porch for several seconds before ringing the bell. He still had a key. But he didn't use it. I opened the door. You know you can come in. He smiled awkwardly. I know. I just figured I'd knock. That single knock repaired something paperwork never could. We spent 3 hours in the garage. Not organizing documents. Not discussing investments. Just repairing the old workbench Margaret always insisted I'd never throw away. Halfway through replacing a warped board, Daniel laughed. I've been doing this wrong. What? I bought expensive tools years ago. He held up my 40-year-old hammer. This thing works better. I laughed. It isn't the hammer. No, it's knowing where to hit. He looked at me. You planned that line, didn't you? I've had 40 years to think of it. For the first time in a long while. We laughed together. A week later, Emily came over for dinner. She noticed something immediately. You two seem different. Daniel looked at me before answering. I've been trying something new. Emily raised an eyebrow. What? Asking. She smiled. About time. Another month passed. The redevelopment company finalized the purchase of the commercial property. The funds were transferred exactly as Rebecca had outlined. Even after taxes, charitable commitments and employee bonus trusts that I had established years earlier. The remaining amount exceeded anything my children had imagined. Daniel never once asked how much he would inherit. Not once. Instead, he asked something entirely different. What do you want this money to accomplish? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered, I've already decided. Over the next 6 months, we created the Margaret Carter Community Scholarship. Every year, 24 students from working-class families would receive full technical college scholarships. No television cameras. No press conference. Just opportunity. Margaret had always believed education changed families more permanently than money ever could. I wanted her name attached to that belief. At the dedication ceremony, the mayor invited me to speak. I declined. Instead, I asked one of the scholarship recipients to tell her story. She spoke for 7 minutes. Every person in the room stood to applaud. As we walked back to the car afterward, Daniel looked at me. I understand now. What? You were never trying to leave us the most money. No, you were trying to leave us the right example. I nodded. Money only shows people who they already are. He didn't answer immediately. Then he quietly said, I don't think I liked who I'd become. I placed a hand on his shoulder. The important part is, you noticed. Years later, when people in town asked about my retirement, they usually expected stories about business. Instead, I found myself telling them about family. Because companies can survive bad decisions. Families often don't. Looking back now, I don't remember the legal documents as clearly as I remember the conversations that followed. I don't remember the appraisals as clearly as I remember my son waiting for me to answer, instead of answering for me. And I certainly don't remember the $34 million valuation as vividly as I remember one ordinary Saturday morning. Daniel and I were standing in my backyard. The old treehouse was gone. Time had finally claimed it. He looked toward the empty corner of the yard. Do you know what? I was wrong about that treehouse. I laughed. You're about 60 years late. It was exactly where it needed to be. I smiled. I know. He looked at me. I should have trusted the man who built it. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Some lessons arrive decades late. They're still worth learning. If there's one thing these years have taught me, it's this. A family doesn't begin falling apart when someone grows old. It begins falling apart the moment people confuse experience with weakness, guidance with control, and love with ownership. That's not one mistake. It's a system. A pattern that quietly repeats itself until someone has the courage to interrupt it. In our family, that someone turned out to be the person everyone thought had become too old to decide for himself. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone make a decision for you without asking what you wanted? Tell me your story in the comments. I read as many of them as I can. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe to Revenge Cold Stories, because I'll see you